I was sitting in the driver's seat of my old Ford pickup, parked on the slight incline of my driveway on a Tuesday afternoon. I turned the ignition off, pushed the heavy metal door open, and swung my left leg out to step down onto the concrete. The second my work boot hit the ground and my full body weight transferred onto that left leg, I heard a sound that made my stomach turn over. It was a dull, wet, grinding pop right under my kneecap. A split second later, a shock of hot, bright pain shot straight up my thigh and deep down into my shin. My entire leg gave out. I had to grab the top of the steering wheel with both hands just to keep my body from collapsing onto the driveway. I stood there for a full minute, leaning hard against the cold door of the truck, waiting for the burning sensation to stop, terrified to put my weight back onto my own leg. That is what it feels like when you lose trust in your own foundation. It is not just about the physical pain of the joint. It is about the sudden, quiet terror of realizing that the parts of your body you rely on to carry you through the world are starting to fail. For 35 years, I walked on solid concrete floors at a logistics warehouse downtown. I carried heavy crates, I climbed steep metal catwalk stairs, and I never once gave a second thought to my knees. They were just the sturdy hinges that kept my legs moving forward. But suddenly, at 73 years old, those hinges felt like they were packed with crushed glass. I did exactly what every man my age does when a joint starts screaming. I tried to buy my way out of the problem at the local pharmacy. I bought one of those thick, tight black neoprene sleeves. I smeared strong-smelling menthol cream over my kneecap every morning, pulled that heavy sleeve up tight over my thigh, and stubbornly tried to walk off the pain. I told myself it was just a bad week. I told myself it was just the damp weather settling into my old joints. But the truth was, every time I looked at the staircase in my own hallway, I felt a heavy knot of dread in my stomach. Going up was difficult, but coming down was pure misery. I started taking the stairs one single step at a time, leading with my good leg, moving like a man 20 years older than I actually was. I honestly believed that my knee joint was simply destroyed. I thought the cartilage had rubbed away entirely, that I was living with bone grinding on raw bone, and that my only two options left were a massive metal replacement surgery or a life stuck sitting in an armchair. That is exactly where my head was when my daughter Megan stopped by the house for a cup of coffee. Megan is an occupational therapist. She spends her entire professional life looking at how older folks move, watching how they compensate for pain, and figuring out how to keep them walking and out of nursing homes. She watched me limp heavily from the kitchen sink to the table, saw the thick black brace wrapped around my leg over my jeans, and just shook her head. She sat down across from me and told me I was treating the victim instead of going after the criminal. I asked her what she meant by that. She told me that the knee is the dumbest joint in the entire human body. It is literally just a hinge on a door. It only knows how to bend and straighten. It does not control how much weight gets dropped onto it, and it does not control the angles of that weight. All of the actual control comes from the heavy muscles in the hip above it and the ankle below it. She explained that because I had retired, because I had stopped moving heavy freight and started sitting in my recliner for 6 hours a day, the heavy support cables in my thighs and hips had quietly packed up and left. My quadriceps had gotten weak. My hamstrings had forgotten how to fire. And because those massive support cables were no longer doing their job, every single ounce of pressure from my body weight was crashing directly down onto the delicate, aging cartilage of my knee joint. The knee was not the root problem. The knee was just the alarm bell ringing because the security system around it had failed. I did not want to believe her at first. The sharp pain was inside my knee, so I thought the damage had to be isolated to my knee. But then she pulled out her phone and showed me a clinical trial she had been reading for her work. It was a study tracking older adults in their 60s and 70s who had severe knee osteoarthritis, the exact same grinding bone-on-bone feeling I was dealing with every morning. She pointed to an observation in the paper that made me stop and read it twice. It said that when these older adults engaged in a highly targeted sequence of movements to rebuild the specific muscles around the knee, they reduced their chronic joint pain by more than 60% in just 8 weeks. They did not get steroid injections. They did not get expensive surgeries. They just physically rebuilt the shock absorber surrounding the joint. She wrote down a specific sequence of 5 movements for me on a notepad. She told me I did not need to join a gym and I did not need to buy any heavy metal weights. I just needed to get down on the rug in my living room and retrain my brain to talk to my muscles again. I want to walk you through all 5 of those exact movements today, just the way she taught them to me. The sequence of these movements matters deeply, and the very last one on this list is the move that actually stopped my knee from buckling when I walked down the porch steps. The first movement she showed me did not even look like an exercise. If you watched me do it, it looked like I was just sitting on the floor doing absolutely nothing. Megan called it a quad set. She explained that when your knee hurts badly, your brain actually sends a signal to shut down the large muscle on the front of your thigh. The brain thinks it is protecting the damaged joint by stopping the muscle from pulling on it. It is a biological short circuit. You can try to walk, but the muscle is essentially asleep, leaving the joint completely exposed to every impact. I had to wake that connection back up before I could do anything else safely. I sat flat on my living room rug with my bad leg stretched out straight in front of me and my good leg bent comfortably. My instructions were simply to tighten the muscle on the top of my thigh, trying to push the back of my knee down firmly into the carpet. The first time I tried it, absolutely nothing happened. I literally could not feel my own thigh muscle contract. It was terrifying to realize how disconnected my brain had become from my own leg. But I kept trying. I focused completely on the front of my leg. On the 4th try, I felt a weak, shaky flutter. I squeezed it, held the tension for 5 steady seconds, and completely relaxed the leg. I did that 10 times. By the end of the 10th repetition, I could actually feel the muscle pulling tight again. I have a buddy from the hardware store named Arthur who had the exact same dead feeling in his thigh. He started doing these quad sets while sitting up in his bed watching the morning news. He told me that just waking that muscle up took away the constant, dull, throbbing ache he used to feel behind his kneecap. It was the foundation of everything that came next. Once my brain remembered how to fire that muscle, Megan had me move immediately to the second movement, which she called a straight leg raise. I stayed in that same seated position on the floor. I locked my thigh muscle tight, exactly like the quad set, making sure my knee was completely straight and rigid. Then, keeping the knee locked, I slowly lifted my entire leg about 12 inches off the floor. I held it in the empty air for 1 single second, and then I took 3 slow seconds to lower it back down to the rug. Megan warned me about the trap most men fall into with this one. She told me not to try and lift my leg up to the ceiling. Lifting it high just shifts the work into the lower back and defeats the entire purpose of the movement. The magic happens in that 12 inches of space because lifting the heavy weight of your own leg with a locked knee forces the quadriceps to carry the entire load without putting any bending stress on the damaged cartilage inside the joint. I did 10 repetitions of that. My thigh was burning by the 8th lift. It was the first time in over 6 months I had felt my muscle working hard without feeling a single spike of pain inside my actual knee. Before I tell you about the third movement, the one that uses a simple household item to safely build real strength in the weakest part of your leg, I need to pause for a second. I am talking to you from my own living room, from my own experience, but I need to know where you are sitting right now. I want you to go down into the comments and tell me exactly how your knees are affecting your daily life today. Does the pain hit you worse when you are walking up the stairs, or is it worse when you are coming down? Does it feel like a dull ache that never leaves, or a sharp, grinding pop that catches you by surprise? I spend hours reading what you write. Understanding exactly what you are fighting against helps me know what we need to tackle next, because none of us should be figuring this out alone in the dark. That brings me to the third movement. This is where we started adding resistance to the leg, but in a way that aggressively protected the joint. Megan called this a short arc quad. I took a thick bath towel from the hallway closet, rolled it up into a tight, firm cylinder, and placed it on the floor horizontally. I sat back down and laid my bad leg over the towel, placing the roll directly behind my knee. This forced my knee into a slightly bent position, maybe 15 degrees off the floor, while my heel rested heavily on the carpet. The movement was incredibly specific. I tightened my thigh muscle to straighten my leg, lifting my heel up off the floor until my knee was completely locked and flat. The back of my knee stayed pressed hard against the rolled towel the entire time. I held the straight position for 2 seconds and lowered the heel back down. Megan explained that this specific tiny range of motion is where older adults lose their strength the absolute fastest. It is the exact angle your knee is at when you are just about to stand up from a low chair. By isolating that last 15 degrees of movement, I was reinforcing the exact mechanical chain that was failing me when I tried to get out of my truck. I did 10 of these on each leg. It was simple, it was safe, and it targeted the weakness with absolute precision. But the front of the leg is only half the story, and the fourth movement shocked me because it did not feel like a knee exercise at all. It was a bridge. I spent decades working in logistics, lifting crates with my lower back and the front of my thighs. I never gave a single thought to the muscles on the back of my legs. Megan told me that my hamstrings and my glutes were practically non-existent from years of sitting, and because the back of my legs had no strength, the front of my legs had to absorb every single shock when my boot hit the ground. I laid flat on my back on the rug, bent both of my knees, and put my feet flat on the floor about hip-width apart. I pushed down through my heels, squeezed the muscles in my backside as hard as I could, and lifted my hips up off the floor until my body made a straight, rigid line from my shoulders to my knees. I held that bridge for 3 seconds and slowly lowered my hips back to the carpet. The first time I did it, the back of my right thigh cramped up so fast I had to grab my leg and roll over. That cramp was the undeniable proof of how weak I had become. The back of my legs had entirely forgotten how to work. I have an older fellow from my church named David who loves to work in his vegetable garden, but was struggling to stand back up after weeding. I showed him this bridge movement. He started doing 2 sets of 10 every evening before bed. A month later, he told me that his knees had stopped aching when he walked up the concrete steps to the sanctuary. By strengthening the back of his legs, he had taken the massive braking force off the front of his knees. The fifth and final movement was the missing piece of the entire puzzle. This was the one that stopped the lateral wobbling. When your knee hurts, you start walking differently without realizing it. You shift your weight. Your knee starts to cave slightly inward with every single step you take, and that inward collapse grinds the inner cartilage down even faster. The muscles that prevent that collapse are located on the outside of your hip. If your outer hips are weak, your knees will inevitably cave. Megan had me lie completely on my side on the floor. I bent my bottom leg to keep my balance, and I kept my top leg perfectly straight. The instruction was to lift my top leg up toward the ceiling. But there was a massive catch to this. Megan watched my foot and immediately stopped me. I was pointing my toes up toward the ceiling when I lifted my leg. She told me that if I point my toes up, I use the front of my hip, which does absolutely nothing to protect the knee. She told me I had to lead with my heel. I had to turn my foot slightly downward toward the floor and pull my heel toward the ceiling, pushing the leg slightly backward as it went up. The difference was instant and painful. A deep, heavy contraction fired right in the side of my hip, almost toward my lower back. It was a muscle I had clearly not used in 20 years. I lifted my leg, leading with the heavy heel, held it for a second, and lowered it. I managed about 8 repetitions before my hip muscle simply refused to lift the weight of my leg again. It was incredibly weak, but Megan explained that this specific outer hip muscle acts like a heavy-duty bungee cord for the knee. When you take a step, that hip muscle pulls tight to keep the leg perfectly straight. Without it, the knee collapses inward and grinds. I started doing 10 of these side lifts every single day. I want to be completely honest with you about how this process felt. It was not a magic trick, and it did not fix me overnight. There were days in the first 2 weeks where my knee still felt stiff, swollen, and angry. There is a terrible trap that men our age fall into when we try to fix our failing bodies. We do these simple movements for 3 days, we feel a little bit better, and then we decide to go out and test it by walking 2 miles or climbing up a heavy aluminum ladder to clean the gutters. We overload the fragile joint before the muscles have actually had time to build real, lasting strength. The pain comes roaring back worse than before, and we quit, convinced that nothing works and that the surgery is our only way out. I had to force myself to be patient. I had to treat my own body like a construction site. You do not drive a heavy freight truck over a bridge while the concrete is still wet. I did my quad sets. I did my straight leg raises. I rolled up the thick towel for my short arcs. I bridged my hips on the rug, and I lifted my leg on my side, making sure to lead with my heel. I did those 5 things, and I rested. I did not test the knee. I just fed it stability and gave it time. The real turning point came about 6 weeks later. It was a Saturday morning. I had bought a 40-pound bag of topsoil from the garden center the day before, and I had left it sitting on the front porch. I walked out the front door, grabbed the thick plastic bag by the corners, hauled it up against my chest, and turned to walk down the 3 wooden steps to the driveway. I took the first step down with my left leg, the bad leg, carrying the bag of dirt. My foot hit the wood. My knee bent to absorb the heavy weight. There was no grinding. There was no pop. There was no shooting hot pain. There was just the firm, steady contraction of the thick muscle in my thigh, holding my weight exactly the way it was designed to do. I stepped down again, and then a third time, straight onto the concrete driveway. I set the bag of soil down and just stood there looking at my own leg. It is incredibly hard to describe the relief of trusting your own foundation again. It feels like getting a piece of your freedom back that you thought you had lost forever. The bone-on-bone pain had been completely real, but the cause was not just worn-out parts. The cause was a support system that had been allowed to go weak in the dark. By forcing those surrounding muscles to wake up and take the heavy load, I had given the joint inside my knee the physical space it needed to breathe and function without being crushed. If you are sitting in a chair right now, wearing a heavy knee brace, swallowing pain pills with your coffee, and looking at the stairs in your house like they are an enemy you cannot defeat, I want you to hear me clearly. Your body is not a broken machine that can only get worse. The muscle is still there. It is just waiting for you to demand something of it. You do not need to accept chronic pain as the mandatory price of turning 60 or 70 or 80. Get down on the floor today. Start with the quad set. Just try to wake up the muscle on the front of your thigh. Take it slow. Make sure you lead with your heel when you do the side lifts, and do not rush the healing process. I am going to stay right here on this porch, testing what works, throwing out what does not, and sharing every single step of the journey with you. Because a man is only as old as his legs feel, and we have entirely too much living left to do to let weak muscles keep us sitting in a chair. Take care of your foundation, put in the quiet work, and I will be here talking to you again very soon.